In this video, I want to spend some time doing some very basic facilitator training because these groups are different than what many of you will have ever participated in. And they are led by a facilitator. And so there's some very important information about what this kind of group does and what it doesn't do, and the skill set that is important for a facilitator, and the guidelines for how these groups are to function and how a facilitator is actually to function in leading these groups. So let me start off by talking about what this kind of group is and what it isn't. First of all, these small groups are not for teaching. This is not a teaching environment like a Bible study class where you have a teacher that stands up, or in a college class where there's someone that has more information than anyone else in the group, and so they're imparting their information. That is not how these groups are designed. Second, these groups are not counseling groups. As a matter of fact, in some states, it would be even illegal to call them that, and so it's very important. These are not counseling groups. What these groups are they are kind of modeled after the old-style support group, but what they really are is they are a self-discovery process. Each person that is in the small group experience is on her own individual journey, but you are doing it in community. You're doing it in the biblical one another process where you can mutually support one another, where you can encourage one another, where you can pray for one another, and where you can create a safe environment where women can be honest about what has happened in their life. And one thing that we discover as we listen to other people sharing their story and their experiences and even their strength and hope that they've gained along the way is that we learn something about ourselves. Out of all the groups that I have been in, and we've been doing these kinds of groups for about 30 years in our church ministry, we've discovered a statement that is very, very true for Christians, that the Holy Spirit in you often will speak to the Holy Spirit in me, and I will learn something about myself by hearing you share your experience, your strength, and hope. And so the info that I'm going to give you is specifically designed for this type of group, what these groups are and what they are not. But also, I need to talk about what the facilitator is and what the facilitator is not. I want to deal with this right off the bat because this is where oftentimes these kinds of groups go bad, when these guidelines are not followed. And oftentimes it's the facilitator that actually is the one that gets off of the track. So because these are not teaching groups, then the first thing a facilitator is not a teacher, not intended to be a teacher in this group. In other words, you're not the great Swami, if you will, pardon my expression, there to impart all of your knowledge and all of your women to these people who don't have the amount of knowledge and wisdom that you do. If there is any teaching that goes on in these groups, it is to be done by the women who are in the video series. They are the teachers, they are the instructors, they have had the experience, they have gone through the healing process, and they are all now professionals in the area of helping other women. So the facilitator is not a teacher and should not see herself as a teacher. Second, the facilitator is not a counselor. These are not counseling groups. And as I said a moment ago, in some states it's even illegal to call them counseling groups. Even if a licensed counselor leads these groups, which I really don't recommend, the counselor needs to take her counseling hat off completely and totally in order to lead a group there. Because once again, the facilitator is not there to teach, but the facilitator is not there to share all of her wisdom for the women that are in the group. So what is a facilitator then? Two things that are very important. A facilitator is to be a participant in the process herself. In other words, the facilitator is to see herself on the same discovery journey as the members of the group. So the facilitator is required to look inside of herself and share from her own discovery. In recovery circles, sometimes we call it sharing from your own experience, strength, and hope. You are a fellow participant, and you must present yourself that way. You must be willing to be vulnerable, as the other women in the group need to be vulnerable. You need to understand that you need to share your victories as well as your struggles. The second role of the facilitator is the facilitator is a guide. So, putting those two together, we call the facilitator a participant/guide. Because as the facilitator is participating, she is also to be guiding the process, primarily using questions, keeping the group on the subject, keeping the group on topic, and even sometimes gently enforcing the agreements of the group. And that leads us to, well, what are these characteristics, if you will, that would make a good facilitator? And this is so important because what we have discovered through the years is that you can take average material and a good facilitator and have a great group. You can take world-class material and a mediocre or even bad facilitator, and you're going to have probably a bad group. So it's very important to understand, well, what are the characteristics of a good facilitator? First of all, is someone who is willing to actively deal with his or her own issues. Who's not just there just to work, but is there actually in the process. Someone who is open about your own personal struggles and are willing to openly share that with the others in the group. Someone who's willing to get out of their comfort zone and learn some new skills. And one of the main skills we're going to talk about in this video is about the skill of asking questions, because question asking is very important in this kind of group. A fourth characteristic is a commitment to integrate your own biblical faith into the reality of your life. Fifth characteristic is someone who is a good listener. Someone who is willing to keep their mouth shut and let other people share. And sometimes facilitators get into this process of someone is sharing and the facilitator feels the need to jump in there and add to that. Or no, a facilitator needs to be a good listener, as do all of the people in the group. And that means, number 6, a facilitator needs to be someone who's not afraid of silence. Because sometimes some people get uncomfortable when there's silence and they want to fill it in with verbiage. But sometimes silence for 5 or even 10 seconds can be a very powerful experience for people who are in this type of group. A 7th characteristic is someone who can be a boundary coach. In other words, these groups have some boundaries that we're going to talk about in a moment, and one of the roles of the facilitator is to enforce those boundaries and keep the group operating within those boundaries. Also, a facilitator needs to be someone who is willing and is able to accept others where they actually are and not expect them to be someplace that hopefully and prayerfully they will be in the future, because we have to be willing to take one another where we are and encourage one another in that place. And a 9th characteristic is a good facilitator is someone who has a plan for conflict. Because over the course of time, particularly dealing with difficult subjects, conflict often does arise in these kinds of groups. And if conflict is not addressed in a healthy kind of way, then small conflicts can actually blow these kinds of groups up quickly. And so for the facilitator, let me give you some things of preparation for the facilitator as you go into these kinds of groups about preparing yourself for potential conflict within the group. First of all, the facilitator needs to check her attitude. In other words, the facilitator before the group needs to prepare herself for whatever's going to happen in that group through prayer, and just sit down and be ready for whatever's going to happen that particular night. But also to understand that you as a facilitator are human, just like everyone else, and you have stressful days and you have bad days, and there are times when you're irritable, and if you're not careful, you'll bring that right into the group, and then that will sabotage any ability to resolve conflict between you and a member, or between two members of that group that night, in any kind of healthy way. So you have to be aware of yourself, aware of your own attitude. And second, for conflict resolution, you have to really understand how to define the problem. Because sometimes the presenting problem of what looks like is going on is really just a surface manifestation of a situation that's deeper. Maybe something that started last week, or maybe something that even started outside of the group and now has been brought into the group. And so for a facilitator, when you're addressing conflict, you have to always be asking yourself the question, what is the real issue that is going on here? Third, you need to be willing to report your feelings. In other words, when we're dealing with conflict, when we use you kinds of statements can be shaming, they can be guilting, and they can also be, well, sabotaging of the entire process of getting through conflict. So it's better to speak about feelings. And when someone has done something that has hurt your feelings or has hurt someone's feelings in the group, rather than saying, you did this and I don't like it, that's a you statement. And that doesn't provide a whole lot of opportunity for conflict resolution. Another way of saying it, and the facilitator can do this for herself, but also instruct others in the groups about how to do it. When that happened, it made me feel. Okay? In other words, you're not focusing on the person, you're focusing on what really happened. And that's really how conflict gets solved, is not focusing on personalities, but really focusing on the problem. And so you statements tend to be condemning. But when you share out of your own feeling, this made me feel this way, and that's the real problem, then you're way down the road toward being able to resolve the problem. Fourth thing you must do in conflict resolution is to be willing to state your request. And in other words, asking people what you want them to do in order to resolve this. And the statement needs to focus on a change of behavior, not upon a person's character. Not like this. You wouldn't want to go, well, you never get anywhere on time and you just need to stop that because that's what this person is upset about. Well, that's not going to get you anywhere. You might try to say it would help if we all got here on time, that none of us were tardy, so that we could all begin the group at the same time. Once again, being able to state it in a healthy way moves you down the road to resolution. The fifth is the ability to negotiate through conflict and to affirm both parties. If the conflict resolution is set up in a win-lose scenario, then everyone is going to lose and the group is going to lose. But when conflict resolution can be set up in a win-win, which means a compromise, that this person moves this way and this person moves this way, and the conflict is resolved, then everybody wins and everyone has given something to the process. So be very careful in conflict of setting up the 100% fault here and 0% fault here, or you need to win this and you need to lose that. No, we need to set up an environment in these kinds of groups to make them safe, where it is always set up as a win-win scenario. Now, I mentioned a moment ago about some agreements that people who enter into this kind of group need to agree to, about how these groups will function, things that will be done and things that will not be done. We're going to provide this as an outline on the website as a PDF so that you can download it. And I suggest that you go around the room and let each person read one of these agreements before each meeting. It'll take a moment, maybe a minute and a half, but it is very, very worthwhile to do it. Let me go through the agreements. Anonymity. We agree to anonymity. In other words, we agree to protect the identities of all group members. If someone asks outside, well, who all's in your group? Say, well, that's not my place to say. I'm in the group, and that's the only one that I can tell you about. Confidentiality. Anything that is said in that group is not to be shared outside of that group by anyone other than the person who shared it. It's their right to tell anyone they want to, but it's no one else's right in the group to go out and share with a husband or share with a friend or share over coffee the next day or whatever. There has to be a sense of confidentiality for women to feel safe about sharing these most intimate details of what has happened in their life. Third is self-focus. We are here to work on ourselves, not on others. Okay, so we're not there to fix each other. We are there to work on ourselves in our own self-discovery process. Fourth, respect others. We do not advise, analyze, or try to fix other people. That's pretty self-explanatory. Fifth, no advice giving. In other words, we do not preach to others in the group, but we only share from our own experience, strength, and hope that we have received. In other words, it's not appropriate in a group like this for someone to have a problem and someone over across the room say, well, let me tell you what I think you ought to do. That is advice giving, and that is not acceptable. No one wants to come to a group like this week after week and have people giving them advice. But what you can do, you can say, I haven't had that exact experience, but I do have a similar experience, and this is how I negotiated my way through that. What you're doing there is you're sharing from your own experience, you're sharing from your own strength, and you're sharing from your own hope. This is true also of the facilitator. If the facilitator is asked by someone in the group, well, what do you think that I ought to do? The facilitator should not answer that question like that. In fact, we'll talk in a moment about how a facilitator can handle that, because that's asking the facilitator to give her advice, and that is not the facilitator's role. The sixth guideline is that we will limit sharing. In other words, we'll be considerate of the need for others to share. Sometimes in these groups, one person can dominate the entire discussion, and that will kill the group, because no one wants to come week after week and hear the same person dominate the discussion. 7, we will allow feelings. In other words, what we mean by that is we're going to avoid minimizing hurts by explaining them away, ignoring them, or avoiding them. This is a place where we are going to allow the free expression of the real feelings without trying to cover them up. And this is very important, number 8, regular attendance. We agree to be here unless absolutely unable because of an emergency or an unavoidable circumstance. If there's one person who's only there about half of the time, well, they're missing a lot of what the group has experienced together, but they also can make the group feel unsafe. Because if they're not there and they haven't really been experiencing that, then someone that week may feel, I'm not really sure I feel safe sharing this with the group, because I'm not sure so-and-so over there is really on board with us in this process. So regular attendance is so vitally important for all of the members. 9, we agree to listen. And that means we won't cross-talk with one another when a person is sharing. When a person is sharing, everyone's attention is to be in that direction with no side conversations going on over here. 10, we agree to stay on the subject. That means we're going to avoid chasing rabbit trails. We're going to avoid discussions that don't relate to the material that we're working through that week. Otherwise, you can wind up at a group, and by the end of it, you really didn't even address anything that was the topic of discussion for that particular week. 11, we will consider others. We will guard against offending others in the group. And when we do, we will adequately apologize, reconcile, do everything we can to make it right. Number 12, the last one, is that we will take responsibility. In other words, we'll be responsible individually to do our own work during the week so that when we come, we have something to share with a group. Once again, if there's a person in the group that's obviously not ever even thinking about this during the week, not doing the workbook, not doing the study guide, that becomes very evident. And others in the group who are really pouring themselves into this may begin to feel a little unsafe about that person's commitment to this process. Now, let me talk about the benefits of these guidelines and the benefits of reading them quickly around the room before every meeting. One benefit is doing this gives a weekly reminder to everyone in the group about these guidelines. And it also helps the facilitator to guide the group, because if one of these guidelines is violated during the course of the group, the facilitator can simply refer back to, now remember, ladies, the guidelines that we read before the group tonight, we agreed that we would not be giving advice. So perhaps there's another way that we need to address this particular statement that was made. But also, these guidelines are created to give a safe place, to give the people that are part of the group a reminder each week, this really is a safe place. These women are not going to be talking about me outside of the group, and I don't have to worry about people coming in here and trying to be my teacher or my instructor, but this is a place where I can be genuine and I can be real. Now let's talk for a moment about leading the group. The group must be limited to 90 minutes. Now, in the 5 weeks of the video, that's 30 minutes for the video, and that's 1 hour for the group. But in the follow-up workbook, because there is no video, then you have a full 90 minutes for that small group discussion. But it is very important that you don't begin to allow it to go on for 2 hours and 2.5 hours, because after a while, people will begin to drop out. Because there are going to be days that everyone's tired after a day at work or whatever, a stressful day, and if the group's been going 2.5 and 3 hours every night, there are going to be people that say, you know what, I just don't have the energy for that tonight. But if they know that your group is going to start on time and it is going to end on the 90-minute mark, oftentimes they will go ahead and come to the group, and you need to honor that commitment. Now, if there is someone that needs to talk longer than that, at the 90-minute mark, after 30 years of doing this, we have discovered that it is best to go ahead and dismiss the group, say we have reached our group time limit, so all of you who need to leave are free to do so, and the facilitator and anyone else who needs to stay afterwards can stay afterward. But the people in the group need to know that they have permission to leave after 90 minutes. A second thing about leading the group facilitator is don't read the material out of the study guide or out of the workbook to the group. Each member should have already read the material, underlined the material, just refer to key parts, pages, and maybe a sentence on that page, and then begin the process of asking questions. I've been in groups before where the facilitator just would spend half of the group just reading paragraphs out of the workbook or the material, and that's very boring, and it doesn't really, it takes up valuable time when people could actually be doing some discussion about that. Another part of this is very important. The third thing is, I've said it over and over, I keep saying it because it's a problem that keeps coming up in groups all over America where I have worked with churches on this kind of thing, is don't teach. The facilitator needs to be silent as much as she possibly can. Don't lecture people. You don't present yourself as having more information or more knowledge, no matter, and you may have, but don't present yourself as that, because then that shuts down the personal discovery that the individual is doing, and they're thinking, well, I'll just come and get the facilitator to tell me what the right answer to this question is or what I should do in my life, and that will sabotage the value of the group. What the facilitator can do and should do is, when it's appropriate, you share your own struggle. You share your own victory. You share from your own experience, strength, and hope. Now, when someone asks you that question as a facilitator and says, well, facilitator, what do you think I ought to do? Here's what you do. Rather than answering that question, you can say, well, I can't tell you what you should do. I can tell you that I had an experience similar to that, and I can tell you how I negotiated through that and what I learned out of that. And if you have that experience, then you can do that. You can share that. But if you don't, the best thing to do is defer to the group and say, well, let's see, does anybody in the group have any kind of experience, strength, and hope that they can share of a similar experience like this? And there will virtually always be someone who has something they can input without giving advice and without directly instructing the individual. So the facilitator, number 4, the way they lead is by using questions. Good questions are like the engine under the hood of the car. Good question asking is what leads, is what drives a good group. Asking good questions is so vitally important. I want to spend the rest of the time on giving you a very simple outline of how you can be a good question asker. Asking questions doesn't come naturally for all of us, but it is a skill that can be learned if a facilitator is willing to learn. And I like to refer to this as the what, the so what, and the now what. That series of questions, the what question, the so what question, and the now what question. Let me describe them to you. The what question. The what question refers the group to the material, if it's the study guide or if it's the workbook. The facilitator might ask questions like this: what did the author say about so-and-so on page? And just stop. And then the women begin to look and they begin to answer. What did the author mean on page 13 in that second paragraph? Or what struck you about what the author said on page 12 about this particular subject? What stood out to you this week as you went through this particular chapter? What was it that grabbed you? What did you answer on question 1 of chapter 3, which is the chapter that we're on this week? That's the what question. It's referring the members of the group back to the actual printed material that the group is using in the process. So there's the what question that can be followed up then with the so what question. After there's been discussion about what actually was said, then the next question can be, well, so what? The so what question refers each individual to do some introspection about the what. So what did that actually mean to you? So what did you understand that the author was saying? So what does that make you feel? Or so what has been your experience with that particular topic or that particular subject? Or so what did you realize as you read this and as you listened this week to the women on that video about that subject? So you move beyond the material now from the what, you move into the personal introspection, and you're asking the participants to share how they engaged and how they interacted and how they intersected personally with that material. And then the third question is the now what question. Okay, so the what question drives people to the material. The so what drives them to personal introspection. The now what question drives us to practical application. So now what do you need to do? Now what do you need to change in your life or your behavior or your attitudes? Now what challenges do you think you're going to face with this particular principle or this particular idea? So you see the what to the material, the so what to the personal introspection, and then the now what gets to the practical application. And for each one of those questions, the individuals in the group are going to have a different perspective, a different answer, a different way of looking at it, and that is going to inform everyone in the group as those kinds of things are. This is group participation. This is not the facilitator teaching. This is the group doing their own individual journey, but benefiting each other as they share what God is showing them and what they've learned or what they need to learn or what challenges they see this is going to bring in their life. Along the way, as during the week, as you're doing the work as a participant, you can create your own questions as well. Writing questions in the margin of the study guide or of the follow-up workbook. And as you ask these what, so what, and now what questions, remember to ask follow-up questions. So you've asked the what question, and you may have a follow-up question, which is, a follow-up question is to get deeper into the subject or into the idea. It's for clarification. What did you really mean by that? That's a follow-up question. It's a what question. For getting more information, drawing more out of the individual than they actually shared. And so by using the what, so what, the now what, by using good follow-up questions for more information, for more introspection, for more evaluation, you can become a good facilitator. Now, every facilitator the greatest problem they're going to face is themselves. We are the ones that get in our own way as facilitators, as participants, as everything. And so the facilitator has to be perfectly aware of her limitations and work within the guidelines of this group, understand her role. You're not a teacher, you're not a counselor, you are a participant, you are a guide, and the way that you guide is by keeping the group within the boundaries of the group, by keeping the group within the boundaries of the agreements that you have made as a group, and then by being that engine that drives this group, and that engine is the question. You're the question asker. You're the one that draws them out to the material, into their own introspection, and then to that final place, well, what are you going to do about this week? Now what are we going to do? What's going to change? What needs to change? And what challenges are you going to face? And as you do that, you can be a good facilitator. You can be a great facilitator, and everyone will walk out of that room going, oh, I learned so much tonight, but nobody taught. It was the Holy Spirit that taught. It was the women on the video that taught. It was the material that taught, and everybody learned it in the way that they needed to. And I hope that this helps you. And I hope that you will take this material. We're going to print it out where you can, we're going to put it on the website where you can print it out. We're going to print out this entire outline for the facilitator training, but then we're going to print out the outline of the particular group guidelines so that you can have those. And each week you can read them for your group in any way that it works for the particular group. God bless you as you move into these groups.